wolf in Kalen Voss's chest had been restless for 6 days. Not the way it was restless before a fight. Sharp and eager and ready. This was different. This was a pulling, like something unseen had a hand around the animal's ribs, and was slowly, patiently, drawing it forward. Kalen had lived with his wolf for 28 years. He knew every mood it had. He knew when it was bored, when it was angry, when it grieved. He knew the particular heaviness it carried when the pack needed him, and he was failing them. He did not know this. The first morning it happened, he had been walking from his chambers to the war room, the same route he had walked every day for 5 years, past the stone archways, down the main hall, left at the iron doors. But somewhere between the archways and the left turn, his feet had changed direction, without asking his mind for permission. He had found himself standing in the east corridor, 20 steps from the kitchen, before a sound from inside jolted him back to himself. He had stood there for 3 seconds, looking at his own feet like they were strangers. Then he had turned around and walked very fast to the war room and told no one. That was 6 days ago. Since then it had happened every morning without exception, and each time he walked a little further before catching himself, which annoyed him in a way that was very hard to articulate. He was the alpha king of the Ironmoor pack. He commanded 12,000 wolves. He had ended a border war at the age of 23, with a strategy his generals still studied. He was not the kind of man whose feet made decisions for him. And yet here he was, standing at his own bedroom window before dawn on a gray Tuesday morning, already arguing with himself about the east corridor. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose and focused. His advisors would arrive in 40 minutes for the morning brief. There was a supply dispute with the Southern Territories that needed a resolution before it became something uglier. There were 3 letters on his desk from pack families requesting formal arbitration hearings. There was a report on rogue sightings near the northern border that needed his full attention. His wolf did not care about any of that. His wolf was already facing east. Kalen pushed away from the window and went to wash his face. Owen Hart arrived precisely at 7, the way he always did, carrying 2 cups of strong tea, and wearing the expression of a man who had already been awake for 2 hours. He was lean and dark-haired, and spoke quickly, with the kind of energy that filled a room before he had finished stepping into it. He had been Kalen's beta since they were both 17, and he took his duties so seriously that it sometimes bordered on a personal condition. "Supply dispute first, or the northern border report," Owen said, setting a cup on the desk without being asked. "Border report," Kalen said. Owen opened the folder and launched into it. Rogue wolves, near the northern pass. 2 sightings in 3 weeks. The pack settlement at Harrow Ridge was concerned. They wanted a patrol increase. "Increase the patrols," Kalen said. "Obviously, the question is how many, and from which rotation. Talk to the garrison captain. He knows the pass better than anyone here. Do not pull from the eastern flank." Owen noted that down. "There is also the matter of the spring summit." Kalen reached for his tea. "What about it?" "Lord Greaves sent a formal reminder. 3 months away. He is asking whether you have given any thought to attending with a partner." Kalen set the tea down. "He sent a formal reminder, about my personal life. He framed it as a matter of pack stability. Lord Greaves can frame it however he likes. It does not change my answer." "You have not given an answer." "My silence is my answer." Owen looked at him for a moment, then looked back at his folder. Right. Moving on. This was one of the things Kalen valued about Owen. The man knew exactly when to move on. Most people in the estate did not have that sense. They pushed and explained and elaborated until Kalen had to cut them off. Owen just moved on. They worked through the supply dispute next. It was a question of grain allocation. The Eastern Territories felt their quota had been unfairly adjusted. The Central Pack Administration insisted the numbers were accurate. Everyone was too proud to simply sit down and look at the records together. Kalen drafted a response requesting both sides submit their full accounting to a neutral party within 2 weeks. It was not a dramatic solution. It was simply the correct one. He signed 4 letters. He reviewed a border map. He approved a construction request for a new training ground in the Western District. And all the while, somewhere in the lower left corner of his chest, his wolf pulled east. By mid-morning, Kalen's patience for it was running thin. He had lived his whole life making decisions based on reason and evidence, and this persistent pull toward a corridor he had no business being in was neither reasonable nor evidenced. He picked up the next document on his desk. His wolf pulled east. He read 3 lines and put the document down. The kitchen, he thought, not for the first time. Whatever his wolf was reaching toward was in or near the kitchen. He had mapped it out with the same logic he would apply to any tactical problem. The east corridor led to the lower wing. The lower wing contained the kitchen, the laundry, the staff quarters, and the storage cellars. He had ruled out the storage cellars because there was nothing there except preserved food and old furniture. The laundry was staffed entirely by a family of older packwomen who had been with the estate for decades and were as familiar to his wolf as his own furniture. That left the kitchen. He had ordered a full new kitchen staff 7 months ago, when the previous head cook had retired after 30 years of service. The new staff had settled in smoothly. The food had been consistently well reviewed by everyone except himself, mostly because Kalen ate for function rather than pleasure, and rarely noticed what was in front of him unless it was extraordinary. Apparently, some portion of his kitchen staff had recently become extraordinary, and his wolf, for reasons Kalen had not yet managed to explain, was very interested in this fact. The pull was stronger today than it had been yesterday. He noticed it the way you notice a sound that keeps repeating. Eventually, you have to turn your head. He stood up from his desk. He told himself he was going to the east corridor to check on the plumbing repair that had been completed 3 weeks ago. This was something he could legitimately do. He was the king. He could go anywhere in the estate for any reason, including plumbing inspections that no one had asked him to conduct. He was halfway down the east corridor before he acknowledged to himself that he was not going to inspect the plumbing. He stopped walking. Ahead of him, 30 feet away, the wooden door to the kitchen was closed. Beneath it, a strip of warm light. Through it, the smell of something, not just food, though there was food in it, something underneath the food, something warm and complex that landed in his chest and made his wolf go very, very still. Not calm, still. The way water goes still right before it reflects something. He stood there for what was probably too long. Then, from inside the kitchen, something fell, a pot, or a ladle, and the sound of a woman's voice, saying something quiet and firm, broke the spell. He was standing in the corridor, staring at a door, like he had never seen a door before. He was the Alpha King. He turned around and walked back the way he had come, and he did not stop walking until he was back in the war room, with the door closed behind him. Owen looked up from his papers. "You look like you have seen something you cannot explain," Owen said. "I have not seen anything," Kalen said. "Keep working." Owen looked at him for exactly 1 second longer than was necessary, then looked back down at his papers. Of course. The rest of the day was straightforward. Kalen signed more documents, held a meeting with the garrison captain about the northern patrols, reviewed a trade proposal from a neighboring pack, and ate lunch at his desk, a plate of something that the staff had brought up from the kitchen, which he barely looked at. He looked at it now. Thin slices of roasted root vegetables with herbs he did not know the names of, arranged over something dark and rich that might have been a reduced broth. It smelled the way the east corridor had smelled, which meant it was from the kitchen, which meant it had been prepared by whoever it was that his wolf was so intensely interested in. He ate it slowly, which was unusual for him. He usually ate the way he did most functional things, efficiently, and without a great deal of attention. But today he ate slowly, and he noticed that each bite was different from the last, that the flavors shifted in a way he did not have the vocabulary to name, and that by the time he finished the plate he felt something he rarely felt during a working day. He felt settled. His wolf had stopped pulling, at least temporarily. It was still facing east, but it had stopped straining, like a dog that had caught a scent and decided, for now, that the scent was close enough. Kalen set the empty plate aside and picked up the next document. That evening, when his chambers were quiet and the estate had settled into its night rhythms, he sat by the window and thought about the problem the way he thought about every problem, methodically, without emotion, looking for the piece that explained the whole thing. His wolf had bonded with exactly no one in 28 years. He had long accepted that his fated mate might simply not exist, or might exist somewhere he would never reach, or might be someone he had not yet encountered. The old pack stories described the fated bond as unmistakable, a sudden, absolute recognition, something that could not be ignored or explained away. This did not feel like that. This felt like something being slowly turned up, like heat being added to water so gradually you did not notice until the steam appeared. He thought about that strip of warm light under the kitchen door. He thought about the smell that had reached him from 30 feet away. His wolf turned over in his chest, the way a sleeper turns toward warmth without waking. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. The next morning, he was back in the east corridor by 7:15. He caught himself 11 steps from the kitchen door this time, before stopping. Progress, in the wrong direction. He stood in the empty corridor and breathed, and the scent from beneath the door was stronger in the morning, bread this time, and something sweeter underneath it, like dried fruit being steeped. His wolf was so still it barely felt like it was breathing. This was becoming a problem. He had no plan for this. He had plans for border disputes and supply chains and pack politics, and the 100 small crises that a king managed daily, but he had no plan for a wolf that kept walking him down a corridor toward a door he had no business standing in front of. He turned around, again. He walked back to the war room, again. Owen was already there. The man looked up, noted whatever was on Kaelin's face, and said nothing. He handed over the morning papers and pointed at the seat across the desk. Kaelin sat down. "There is a new request from the Ashvale family," Owen said. "Lady Clara Ashvale's household is requesting a formal invitation to the spring gathering. Her father is suggesting the occasion might also serve as an opportunity for formal introductions. Tell them the spring gathering has a standard guest list. If they are not on it, they can apply through the regular process." That is a fairly cold response to a high house. Then they should not have phrased it as a matchmaking request in a formal letter. Owen said nothing to that. He wrote something down, which probably meant he was going to soften the response on Kaelin's behalf before sending it, which was exactly what Kaelin paid him to do. "Anything else?" Kaelin said. "That is the morning list. Unless you want to talk about why you have been walking to the east corridor every day for a week, and coming back with that look on your face." Kaelin looked at him. Owen looked back, completely unafraid. "There is a smell," Kaelin said finally, because Owen had been his beta for 11 years, and the man would work it out eventually anyway. Owen's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. "A smell," he said carefully. "Coming from the kitchen, my wolf is interested in it," Kaelin said, which was the most controlled sentence he had constructed in recent memory. Owen set down his pen, very slowly. "How long?" 6 days. 6 days, Owen repeated. He looked at the desk for a moment. Then he looked back up and said, in the tone of someone choosing their next words with great care, "Have you considered going inside?" Kaelin said nothing. Owen picked his pen back up. "Right. Well, that is certainly a decision." It was not a particularly useful conversation, but Kaelin found, as the day continued, that having said it out loud made it slightly more manageable. His wolf was interested in something in the kitchen. He did not know what or why. He was choosing to handle it by not going into the kitchen, which his wolf deeply disagreed with, and the situation would presumably resolve itself one way or another. On the 7th day, for the first time, he made it to 12 steps from the door before stopping. He stood there long enough for the sounds inside to become distinct, the regular rhythm of a knife on a board, the low murmur of a voice giving direction to someone, the hiss of something hitting a hot surface, small sounds, working sounds, the everyday sounds of someone doing a thing they knew how to do. And his wolf, inside his chest, made a sound he had never heard it make before, not a growl, not a whine, something between those things, low and wondering, like it had just remembered something it had been trying to remember for a very long time. Kaelin put his hand flat against the stone wall and breathed. He was going to have to go inside that kitchen. He did not do it today. He turned around and walked back for the 7th time. But as he walked, he made himself one promise. He would find out who worked in that kitchen. He would do it quietly and without drawing attention, and he would keep it entirely rational. He asked Owen that evening, with careful neutrality, to bring him the current list of kitchen staff. Owen placed it on his desk without a word and left the room. Kaelin read the list. There were 8 names, 7 he recognized in the vague way he recognized all the estate staff, faces attached to functions, people he had passed in the hall or acknowledged at estate gatherings. The 8th name was new. Sarah Doon. Head cook. Arrived 4 months ago. Northern Pack origin. Letter of recommendation from the Greyfen Pack's estate house. He stared at the name for a long time. His wolf leaned forward. Sarah Doon did not think about the Alpha King. This was not unusual. Most of the kitchen staff did not think about him either. He existed somewhere in the upper floors of the estate, the way weather existed above the clouds, vast and consequential, and entirely removed from the work of cutting onions. She had arrived at Ironmore Estate 4 months ago, with a leather bag that held 3 changes of clothes, 2 knives she had owned since she was 17, and a letter of recommendation that had taken her 2 weeks to obtain. The estate had taken one look at her references, asked her to prepare a single tasting meal, and offered her the head cook position before she had even cleared the dishes. She had not expected that. She had expected to spend at least a year working under someone else before earning the title. But the previous head cook had left quietly, and the kitchen needed someone who could manage both the work and the people, and apparently the lamb she had prepared with the charred herb crust and the cold roasted root salad had communicated something that her references alone had not. She had accepted the position the same way she accepted most things, steadily, without too much expression, and with the private understanding that she would work twice as hard as anyone expected. 4 months in, the kitchen ran the way Sarah needed it to run. Not perfectly, nothing ever ran perfectly, but smoothly, with a rhythm she had built from scratch. The morning shift started before the sky was gray. The midday service was precise and efficient. The evening meals were where she let herself be a little more creative, where she took the ordinary ingredients of a pack estate and made them into something that people talked about the next day. The staff liked her. Not immediately. Kitchen staffs rarely liked new heads immediately, especially younger ones. But she had earned it the way she always earned things, by knowing her craft, by not asking anyone to do something she would not do herself, and by the simple fact that she remembered how everyone took their tea. Ada, who had been in the kitchen longer than anyone else, told her on the 3rd week that she was the best head cook she had seen in 20 years. Sarah had thanked her, and asked her to please check the bread, which was about to burn. Pip, who was 17, and learning everything at once, followed Sarah around like a curious bird, asking questions constantly, and occasionally dropping things. Sarah answered every question, and replaced the dropped things without making it a lesson. She remembered what it was like to be 17 and learning. The estate itself was bigger than any place she had lived before. Ironmore. She had heard the name growing up. Everyone in the northern packs had. The Alpha King of Ironmore was the name used in pack law, in trade agreements, in the stories old wolves told about times when the territories were less stable than they were now. Ironmore was where decisions were made. She had never expected to be cooking inside it. The estate was made of dark stone that held the cold in the mornings and released it slowly through the day. The kitchen was in the eastern wing, which got good light in the afternoons, and had a back door that opened onto the herb garden. One of the first things Sarah had done was spend 3 hours in that garden cataloging what was there and what needed to be planted. She had written a list and submitted it to the estate's supply master, who had raised his eyebrows and then approved it without comment. The herbs were coming in well now. Rosemary and thyme, and the pale northern variety of sage that did not grow in most southern kitchens, but that Sarah had grown up with, and could not imagine cooking without. It reminded her of home. She did not always want to be reminded of home, but she had learned a long time ago that certain smells could not be controlled. Her mother had kept a kitchen garden, 3 rows of herbs, a bed of root vegetables, and a corner of wild garlic that no one had planted, and no one had the heart to pull up. Her mother had cooked the way some people breathed, without thinking about it, as a natural condition of being alive. Sarah had learned to cook in that same kitchen, standing on a wooden stool to reach the counter, her mother's voice in her ear naming things. This is how you hold a knife. This is how you listen to what the pot is telling you. This is how you make someone feel welcome, without saying a single word. Her mother had died in the rogue attack 8 years ago. So had her father. So had most of her pack. Sarah did not talk about this with the estate kitchen staff. It was not their weight to carry. She carried it herself, quietly, in the way she had always carried things, folded small and kept close, where it could not trip anyone else. It came out in the food sometimes. The broth she made on cold days, thick with root vegetables, and the particular spice combination her mother had used. The bread recipe, that was technically her grandmother's, and that she had never written down because she was afraid that writing it down would make it feel like a memorial. The dried fruit biscuits she made on dark winter afternoons that had no real kitchen purpose except to smell exactly the way her childhood kitchen had smelled. People ate those things and told her the food was extraordinary. She smiled and thanked them and did not explain what they were really tasting. The odd feeling had started about 3 weeks ago. She had not placed it immediately. It was not a pain. It was more like a pressure, very low in her chest, on the left side. A warmth that appeared and disappeared without any pattern she could identify. She had chalked it up to long hours and not enough sleep, and she had gone to bed earlier for a week, and the feeling had not changed, so she had simply stopped thinking about it. Her wolf was quiet about it. This was unusual. Her wolf was usually opinionated. It had opinions about weather and food and the relative trustworthiness of strangers. It was an omega wolf, which meant it was small and not particularly powerful in the way that pack hierarchies measured power, but it was observant and stubborn, and it paid attention to things that mattered. On the subject of the warmth in Sarah's chest, her wolf said nothing. It just turned, very slowly, to face a direction, and stayed there. The morning of the 6th day of the feeling, though she had not been counting, exactly, she was preparing the breakfast service when Ada came through the back door with a bundle of fresh thyme and a look of studied nonchalance that meant she wanted to say something and was deciding whether to say it. "Say it," Sarah said, without looking up from the dough she was working. "I heard from Cole," Ada said, setting the thyme down, "that the Alpha King has been walking the East Corridor in the mornings." "Wolves walk corridors," Sarah said. "It is a common activity. He does not usually walk that one." Sarah looked up then. Ada was pretending to sort the thyme very carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah said. "No reason," Ada said, in the voice of a woman who had a very specific reason. "Ada. He walks it every morning, apparently. Gets close to the kitchen door, and then turns around." She paused. "Cole says he looks like a man, arguing with himself." Sarah said nothing. She looked down at the dough and kept working. "That is all," Ada said, and started arranging the thyme with great focus. The warm pressure in Sarah's chest tightened, very slightly, and then eased. She breathed through it. "Make sure the bread goes in by 7, she said. "The morning service needs it on time." "Of course," Ada said. Sarah worked through the breakfast service with her usual precision. She managed 3 kitchen staff, monitored 4 dishes at once, corrected Pip's chopping technique twice, and sent up 2 complete breakfast trays to the upper floors, without ever stopping to think about Alpha Kings, or East Corridors, or feelings she could not explain. She was very good at not thinking about things. But she noticed, in the quiet moment after the last breakfast tray went up, that the warmth in her chest was stronger than usual this morning. Not uncomfortable, just present, like a hand placed gently on her shoulder by someone she could not see. Her wolf, sitting very still in the direction of east, made a small sound she chose not to examine. Old Marin appeared in the kitchen doorway at 9:30, the way she sometimes did. Marin was the estate's head housekeeper, a small, gray-haired woman, who had been at Ironmore for longer than anyone could remember, and who moved through the estate with the quiet authority of someone who had outlasted several dramatic events, and expected to outlast several more. She was not technically part of the kitchen staff, but she appeared in the kitchen regularly, and no one had ever questioned this, because Marin was the kind of person whose presence simply became a fact. "Broth smells good this morning," Marin said, stopping near the stove. "It is the sage," Sarah said. "Northern variety. It takes longer to come through, but the flavor is worth it." Marin looked at her for a moment, with those very still, very sharp eyes. "Your mother teach you that?" Sarah paused. She had not told anyone about her mother, not specifically. "The northern packs use it differently than the south does," she said carefully. Marin nodded, as if this was entirely the answer she had expected. She looked around the kitchen, at the bread in the oven, at Pip carefully quartering apples at the side table, at the orderly arrangement of the working surfaces, and nodded again. "You have done well with this kitchen," Marin said. "It was already a good kitchen," Sarah said. "It is better now." Marin turned to go, then stopped. "There are wildflowers growing along the east wall of the herb garden. Not planted ones. They just appeared last week. Old gold ones." Sarah looked at her. That is nice. It is, Marin agreed, and something in her expression was very calm and very knowing, like a woman reading the last page of a book she had been reading for a long time. I thought you would like to know. She left. Sarah stood at the stove and thought about wildflowers, for probably longer than wildflowers deserved. Then she picked up a wooden spoon and went back to work. The day moved the way busy days moved, quickly in the spaces she was occupied, and slowly in the 2 minutes she allowed herself to sit after the midday service. She ate standing up at the prep table, a bowl of the broth she had been making all morning, and she thought about the week's menu and whether the supply order she had submitted needed any adjustments. She did not think about the Alpha King. She did not think about the corridor. She did not think about the feeling in her chest that was, today, pointing at the door like a compass needle pointing north. She washed her bowl, put it away, and started the afternoon prep. That evening, after the dinner service was cleared and the kitchen staff had gone to their quarters and the estate had settled into its night sounds, Sarah sat at the long prep table with a candle and the seam she needed to mend in her work apron. The kitchen was warm and quiet. The stone walls held the day's heat. Outside the back door, the herb garden was silver in the moonlight. She worked the needle through the cloth with steady hands, and she did not think about the fact that the warm pressure in her chest had been building slowly all day, the way a storm builds, not sudden, but unmistakable. She was Omega-born. She had known since she was a girl what that meant in pack terms: low rank, limited reach, the kind of wolf who made herself useful and stayed in her lane, and did not aspire to things that were above her station. She had made peace with this years ago, or close enough to peace, that she rarely examined the distance. But tonight, sitting alone in the warm kitchen, with the needle moving through cloth, she thought about the old pack stories, the ones her mother used to tell, about fated bonds and what they felt like when they were coming, not all at once, but slowly, like light under a door. Like warmth in the left side of your chest. Like a compass needle that had found its north. She bit the thread and set the apron down and looked at the kitchen door that led to the east corridor. She did not open it. But her wolf, sitting in the direction of east, with its head raised and its ears forward, made a sound that was almost hopeful. "Stop that," Sarah told it quietly. Her wolf did not stop. It happened on a Thursday. That was the detail that Sarah would later find herself fixed on, the small, specific fact that it was a Thursday, as if the day of the week explained something about why the universe chose that particular morning to stop letting both of them avoid it. She had been carrying the mid-morning tray from the kitchen to the serving station at the end of the east corridor, a route she had walked 100 times without incident. The tray held a tureen of spiced lamb broth, 4 ceramic bowls, a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, and a handled pot of herb tea. It was heavy, and she had balanced it against her hip, moving briskly, because the morning service had run long, and she was behind schedule. She heard his footsteps, a half-second before he appeared. Not in time to stop. The collision was complete and immediate. The tray hit his arm, tilted, and the tureen went first. Broth splashed across his chest. The ceramic bowls followed, 2 of them hitting the stone floor and shattering cleanly. The bread fell. The tea followed the bread. There was a single loud crash, and then silence. Sarah hit the floor with her knees first, instinct dropping her down to grab the remaining ceramic before it shattered. Her palms caught the cold stone. She stayed there for a breath, taking inventory. Nothing broken on her body. Significant loss of crockery. Broth damage assessed and irreversible. Then she looked up. The man standing over her was large in the way that certain wolves were large. Not just physically, though he was certainly that, but in the way he took up space, in the way the air seemed to rearrange itself slightly around his presence. Dark coat, broad shoulders, jaw that looked like it had been made by someone who did not believe in unnecessary angles. His eyes were a particular shade of gold that she did not have a name for. She did not know his face. She had never been in a room where he stood, never attended a gathering where he appeared, never had cause to be in the upper floors. She knew his name, the way the whole pack knew his name. As a title as much as a name, as a fact of the world she lived in. But she knew what power smelled like. She had always been able to smell it. And this man was saturated in it, the way very old wolves are saturated in their own authority. Not performed, just real, just there. The Alpha King was standing over her, with broth on his shirt. "Your Majesty," she said, and her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "I am so sorry. I did not see you. Please allow me to." She started to push herself up. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was lower than she had expected. Not loud. It did not need to be loud. "No," she said. "I am completely fine. I am so—" "Your palms." She looked at her palms. There was a small scrape on the right one, where she had caught herself on the stone. Nothing significant. A little blood. "It is nothing," she said. He reached down. Later, she would remember this moment. Not the collision, not the broth, not the shattered ceramic, but the moment he reached down with one hand and waited. Patient and certain, like a man who fully expected her to take it. She took it. His hand was large and warm, and the moment her palm met his, something happened in her chest that was not the ember she had been ignoring for weeks. This was not a warmth or a pressure or a compass needle. This was a current, clean and immediate, running from her hand through her arm and settling somewhere in the center of her sternum, with a certainty that took her breath away. She was standing. She did not fully remember the moment between his hand pulling and her being on her feet. She was just suddenly standing, and he was still holding her hand, and his eyes were slightly different from a moment ago. Still gold, but deeper, like light through water. He let go of her hand. The current receded, not gone, receded, the way a wave recedes, still there in the water, still moving. She became aware that she was staring at him. She looked away immediately, at the shattered bowls, at the broth spreading across the stone floor, at the bread sitting in the mess. "I will have this cleaned immediately," she said, "and your coat. If you leave it with the laundry, I can ensure the stain." "Watch where you walk," he said. His voice was flat, not cruel. She had heard cruel voices and knew the difference. Just closed, the way a door closes when someone needs to think. He turned and walked back the way he had come, and he did not look at her again, and in 30 seconds he was gone around the corner and the corridor was empty. Sarah stood in the broth and the broken ceramic and did not move for a full 10 seconds. Then she set about cleaning it up. She collected the broken pieces carefully, soaked up the broth with the cloth that had wrapped the bread, and carried everything back to the kitchen in 3 trips. She did not think about what had happened. She thought about what she needed to prepare for the midday service, which was still in approximately 40 minutes, and how she was going to replace the lost broth in time. Pip appeared as she was starting the replacement batch. He took one look at her expression, and, wisely, said nothing. He simply began washing the remaining bowls. Ada came in 10 minutes later, and assessed the kitchen with a quick look. "What happened?" she said. "I dropped the tray," Sarah said. Ada looked at the amount of cloth that was soaked in broth sitting in the waste bucket, and then looked at Sarah's face, and then clearly made the decision to ask no further questions. "I will start the bread for the midday service," she said. "Thank you," Sarah said. She stood over the new broth and stirred it slowly, and did not think about gold eyes. She thought about her hands, which were very slightly unsteady. She pressed them flat against the warm side of the pot, and breathed. Her wolf, which had been quiet and directional for weeks, was no longer quiet. It was doing something she could not quite name. Not howling, not barking, but making a sustained, low sound that sat at the very edge of her hearing. Like something that had been half awake for a very long time, and was now fully, completely, irreversibly awake. "Stop," she told it. It did not stop. She turned her attention to the broth, and kept it there. The midday service happened. She made it work. She was efficient and precise, and she managed the kitchen the way she always managed it. And if there was any difference between this afternoon and any other, it was perhaps that she moved a little more carefully, watched the doorways a little more, and registered every sound in the corridor outside with slightly more attention than usual. He did not appear. After the service, she went to the herb garden and stood in the afternoon light and breathed cold air until her mind was quieter. The wildflowers Marin had mentioned were there along the east wall. Small, gold-colored ones, the kind that usually appeared in late spring, though it was barely past midwinter. She crouched down and looked at them for a moment without touching them. Old gold wildflowers in January. Her mother had called them truth flowers. She had said they only grew where something real was happening. Sarah stood up and went back inside. She replayed the collision all evening while she worked, which she had promised herself she would not do. Not the crash itself. That part was just embarrassing, and would be embarrassing until she forgot it. But the moment after, the reaching down, the hand, the current. She had heard, in the vague way one hears stories about things that will never apply to oneself, that the fated bond felt like electricity, like something switching on. She had never put much thought into those stories because they generally happened to wolves with rank and standing. They did not happen to Omega cooks who carried breakfast trays in the East Corridor. Her palm itched, slightly, where his hand had been. She washed her hands carefully and methodically, and told herself it was just the scrape. By the time she locked the kitchen at night and made her way to the staff quarters, she had worked herself into something approaching reasonable. It had been a strange day. She had collided with the Alpha King, which was embarrassing. He had helped her up, which was unexpected. There had been a moment that felt like something, which was almost certainly nothing. She had a lot of work to do in the morning. She had a supply order to review and a menu plan to finalize, and Pip needed more practice with his knife technique. She had things to do. She had a kitchen to run. Her wolf sat in the corner of her chest and pointed east, and was not fooled by any of this for a single moment. Sarah lay in the dark of her small room and stared at the ceiling and thought, that was nothing. And knew, with the clarity that comes right before you fall asleep and your defenses finally let go, that it was something. That it was quite possibly the largest something she had ever felt in her life. She pressed her hand over her sternum, where the current had settled, and felt it there even now, quiet but present, the way a fire is still warm, even after you have stopped looking at it. She closed her eyes. Sleep did not come quickly. Kalen did not go back to the East Corridor. This was a decision he made deliberately on the morning after the Thursday collision, and maintained with the kind of discipline that had built an entire career. He rerouted his path. West Wing in the morning. War Room directly after breakfast. No detours. No East Corridor. No East anything. He was a king. He made decisions, and he kept them. His wolf had other opinions. The pull was stronger now, which was the part he had not anticipated. He had expected that brief contact, 3 seconds of her palm in his, to diminish whatever this was. Logic suggested that encountering the thing your instincts were reaching toward would satisfy the instinct, at least temporarily, but this had not eased. This had intensified, the way touching a bruise makes you suddenly and precisely aware of exactly where it is. He sat at his desk on Friday morning and worked through his correspondence with the methodical competence that everyone around him relied on, and somewhere in the lower left quadrant of his chest, his wolf was pointing east with every part of itself. He signed a trade agreement. He drafted a patrol assignment. He approved a building repair estimate. She had gone down fast, not panicked, just practical, getting low to minimize the damage. That was an interesting reflex. Most people, colliding with an Alpha King, experienced a brief paralysis first. She had been moving before the last bowl hit the floor. And when she had looked up at him, her eyes had been present, fully there, taking in the situation without fear, though she should have been frightened. Not because he had given her any reason to be, but because most Omegas were frightened by Alpha rank simply as a matter of conditioning. 8 years of pack hierarchy trained it in. She had looked at him like she was calculating something. He had not expected to find that as interesting as he did. He picked up the next document and read the same first sentence 4 times before he acknowledged that reading was not happening at the moment and set it down. He had helped her up. He had reached for her hand before he had thought about it, which was not like him. He was not someone who reached for people. He shook hands when it was formal and required. He touched Owen's shoulder when something was very wrong and words were not working, but he did not generally extend his hand to strangers on the floor without consideration. His hand had moved before his brain had issued any instructions. He was not going to think about the 3 seconds of her palm in his. He was absolutely not going to examine the thing that had happened in that corridor, the thing that had started somewhere in his sternum and moved outward with the certainty of something that knew exactly what it was doing. He was not going to think about it, because thinking about it would require him to consider the possibility that his wolf had not been walking him to the kitchen because of a smell. Owen appeared in the doorway. "Lord Greaves is here early." "Send him in," Kalen said, and put his complete attention on the day, where it belonged. The week continued. On Saturday, he was passing the corridor near the kitchen entrance. on an entirely legitimate route to the groundskeeper's offices, when he heard, from behind the closed kitchen door, a laugh. Not a full laugh, just a short, bright sound, cut off quickly, as if the person making it had surprised themselves by making it, followed by another voice, saying something that made the first voice say something back. He paused. He identified that this was not information he needed, and kept walking. On Sunday, he was in the upper gallery reviewing the estate map when one of the household guards, a steady, competent wolf named Cole who had been at Ironmore for 3 years, came by with a message for the supply master, and in the process of passing through the gallery, he said to another guard, in the easy tone of someone making conversation, "Grab the last 3 of the lamb rolls. Do not tell anyone. They are gone now." The other guard said something about the morning pastries. Cole said, "No. Sarah makes those different. Those are different. You have to be there before 7, or there is no point." Sarah. It was the first time he had heard her name spoken by someone else. He kept his eyes on the map, but her name landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there, brief and specific, like a coin landing heads up. On Monday, a plate came up from the kitchen for his lunch that was different from the usual arrangement. Not dramatically, the same roasted vegetables, the same dark broth underneath, but something in the balance of it had shifted. The herbs had been adjusted, more of something, less of something else, and the result was something he could only describe as warmer, which was a strange way to describe food, but was the most accurate word he had. He ate the whole thing, which was unusual. He thought, not for the first time, that whoever was making this food was doing something unusual with it, something that went beyond skill. He did not have language for what that was, but it was real. He had been eating food prepared by skilled cooks his entire life, and it had never made him stop in the middle of a meal the way this did. Maren came to his study on Tuesday afternoon, which was irregular. She occasionally appeared for household matters that required his direct authority, but those were rare enough that her presence in the study doorway caught his attention. "Your Majesty," she said, with the perfectly measured formality she had used with him since he was 12. "Maren," he said. "What is it?" "A small matter of the kitchen supply schedule," she said, setting a sheet on the corner of his desk. "The head cook has submitted a revised request for the spring herb order. If you would like to review before I authorize." "You have authorization to approve kitchen supply requests," he said. "I am aware," Maren said. "I thought you might like to see this one." He looked at her for a moment, then looked at the sheet. It was a clean, orderly list, handwritten, in small, careful letters. A full page of herbs and root vegetables and spices, organized by growing season, with notes beside each one about sourcing and timing, and which dishes each was intended for. At the bottom, in the same careful hand, a note. "The northern variety of sage requires a specific supplier in the upper territories. I have included the name of the grower my previous pack used. They are reliable, and their prices are fair." "Approve it," Kaelin said, and handed the sheet back. Maren took it. She did not move immediately toward the door. "She knows what she is doing," Maren said, conversationally, in the tone she used when she wanted to say something and was being careful about how she said it. "The staff report says the kitchen has been running efficiently," Kaelin agreed, in the tone of a man who was not taking the bait. "More than efficiently." A pause. "She is from the north, Grayfen territory. Originally, her family's pack." Something in his attention sharpened. "I read the reference letter." "The reference letter did not mention what happened to her original pack," Maren said. He looked at her directly then. Maren's expression was exactly as calm as it always was. 8 years ago, rogue attack. She was 17. Most of the pack did not survive.
He said nothing. Something adjusted, quietly, inside him.
"She came here with 1 bag and 2 knives and a letter of recommendation, and did the most extraordinary work in my 30 years at this estate," Maren said. "I thought you might want to know." "Thank you, Maren," he said. "Of course." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "The wildflowers along the east wall of the herb garden are blooming. Out of season. Thought I would mention it." He knew what wildflowers out of season meant. Every wolf who had grown up in a pack with any memory of the old traditions knew what they meant. He looked at the window for a long time after she left. On Wednesday, Owen knocked on the war room door during the afternoon and put 3 letters on the desk. "Political correspondence," he said, 2 from allied packs, 1 from Lord Greaves again. What does Greaves want? He is formally asking that you attend the spring summit with a confirmed partner announcement. He is using the language pack stability and succession clarity. Kaelin picked up the list. Lady Clara Ashvale's name was at the top. I will respond, Kaelin said. That night, he was in the upper gallery again. He sometimes worked there in the evenings because it was quieter than the war room and had better light. When he caught a faint thread of scent from somewhere below, wood smoke and something he now recognized as the particular spice combination from the kitchen, the evening meal being prepared. He stood at the gallery railing and breathed it in without deciding to. Somewhere in the lower floors, Cara Dune was cooking. She did not know that the Alpha King was standing in the gallery above the east wing, with his wolf pointing at the floor beneath his feet like an arrow. She did not know that he had heard her name twice this week, and that both times it had landed in his chest with the quiet certainty of something that was already decided. She did not know that he was running out of reasons to keep turning back. He stood at the railing until the scent drifted and then dispersed, and then he went back to his desk and picked up the next document. His wolf did not move from its position. It sat, entirely still, and pointed at the floor below with every patient, determined part of itself. Merrin passed through the gallery at 9:30, on her evening rounds. She stopped when she saw him at the railing, said nothing, looked at him for a moment. Wildflowers are still blooming, she said. Good night, Merrin, he said. She smiled, small, contained, knowing, and moved on. It was past midnight when Kaelin walked to the kitchen. Not toward it, the way he had been walking toward it for nearly 2 weeks, in the half-aware, argued with himself way of mornings. He walked to it directly. No pretense, no alternate route, no pretending he was going somewhere else, and simply getting distracted. He walked through the dark east corridor with a candle that he put out when he got close enough to see the strip of light under the door, and he stood outside that door in the dark for a count of 5, and then he pushed it open. She was there. Alone at the long prep table, sitting sideways on the bench, a candle at her elbow and her work apron in her lap. She was mending something, a seam, he thought, though she startled and nearly dropped it when he appeared in the doorway. Her hands moved fast, catching the fabric, and then she was on her feet with the speed of someone trained by years of alertness. Your Majesty, she was already straightening, already reaching for the professional composure that she wore like armor. The kitchen is closed, but I can prepare something immediately. Please let me. Sit down, he said. He said it without force, not a command, just a request, given in the quiet voice he used, when he was not performing authority, but was simply stating what he wanted. She looked at him for one measured moment, and then, to his genuine surprise, she sat down. He crossed the kitchen to the table. He sat down across from her, which surprised them both. He could see it in the way her hands stilled on the apron. He looked at the pot on the back of the stove, which was still sending up a faint thread of steam. What were you making tonight? He said. She looked at him for a moment, then she looked at the pot. The evening broth, she said. I make a batch every evening that carries over to the next morning. It saves time in the early service, and the flavor develops better overnight. What is in it? She seemed to consider whether this was a genuine question. It was. Root vegetables, she said. Carrots, parsnips, the northern variety of sweet turnip, bay leaves. A little wine that has gone past the point of drinking, but has not gone past the point of cooking. A small pause. And sage, the pale northern kind. Where did you learn that combination? Another pause, slightly longer this time. She looked at the pot, rather than at him. My mother, she said. The word came out simply, without rehearsal. He let it sit. She kept a kitchen garden, Cara said, after a moment, more quietly. 3 rows, a corner of wild garlic. She cooked every day of her life, and she never used a recipe written down. Everything was in her head and her hands. She taught you. Since I was small enough to need a stool to reach the counter. A breath. I used to stand next to her while she worked, and she would narrate everything, like she was telling me a story. This is how you hold a knife. This is how you listen to the pot. This is how you make someone feel welcome without saying a word. He looked at her. She was looking at the candle now, her hands resting still on the apron in her lap. Her face was open, in the way faces go when they are talking about something old. not sad exactly, but soft with time. Marin told me what happened to your pack, he said. 8 years ago. She did not tense, she did not look away, or close herself down. She just breathed for a moment, and then she said, I was 17. I was in the outer field with some of the younger children when it started. By the time we knew what was happening, it was already. She stopped. By the time we knew, it was over. You survived. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, which turned out to be the right place at the right time. She looked at him then, and there was something in her eyes that was very clear and very steady. Not bitterness. Just truth. I have never been sure how to feel about that. He had lost his father when he was 23. He had held the pack together through the transition, with all the composure he could manage, because a king who broke apart under grief gave his pack nothing to stand on. He had not talked about it with anyone except Owen, and even with Owen he had been careful with the words. He understood the feeling of not knowing how to feel about surviving something. I lost my father the year I took the throne, he said, which was also not something he said to people. He was sick for a while. I watched it happen slowly, which people told me was a mercy, that it was not sudden, that I had time to prepare. But you cannot prepare for that, she said. No, he said, you cannot. They sat with that for a moment. The candle burned between them, and the pot breathed on the stove, and the kitchen was quiet in the particular way that places go quiet late at night when the weight of the day has settled. Do you eat? She said suddenly. He looked at her. Properly, she clarified. Owen, the beta. He mentioned once to the supply master that you work through meals. I noticed the trays coming back unfinished. He almost said that he was a king, and his eating habits were not a kitchen concern, and stopped himself, because that was not why he was here at midnight. I eat when I am hungry, he said. That is not the same as eating properly, she said, and stood up and went to the stove. He watched her move with the ease of someone who knew exactly where everything was in a room. Not looking, just reaching, and finding what she reached for. She ladled broth into a bowl, cut 2 pieces from the bread sitting on the board, and set them on the table in front of him. You do not have to, he started. I know, she said, and sat back down with the apron. He looked at the bowl. Then he picked up the spoon. It was the same broth he had caught a thread of from the gallery, but more immediate, warm and complex, the sage note running through it, the way certain sounds run through music, not dominant, but present, and holding everything else together. He ate slowly. She worked on the seam. The kitchen held them both. Between bites, he asked her things. About the northern pack she had come from, about the particular way they ran their kitchen, about what she had done in the 8 years between losing them and arriving at Ironmore. She answered with the same directness she had shown from the start. No performance, no over-explanation, just the honest answer in as many words as it required. She had worked at 4 pack estates. Each one had taught her something. At the first, she had learned efficiency. At the second, she had learned how to manage a staff. At the third, she had learned, and here she paused and chose her words carefully, how to be useful without being invisible, which she said were 2 different things that it had taken her time to understand. What is the difference? He said. She set the apron down and thought about it with genuine attention, which he found he liked, the way she did not rush answers. Being useful means doing the work well, she said. Being invisible means doing it in a way that no one notices you exist. I was invisible for a long time. I thought that was the same as being good at my job. And then I realized that invisible just meant I could be removed without anyone arguing about it. Something passed through her eyes, very briefly. Not pain, exactly, but the memory of pain. I decided I would rather be seen, even if it was harder. He looked at her for a moment. It seems to have worked out. She looked at the kitchen around her, the clean surfaces, the organized station, the hanging herbs drying above the window. It is a good kitchen, she said. I have liked it here. She said liked, past tense, and he noticed. What does that mean? He said. Nothing, she said, and picked up the apron again. Forget I said it. He did not forget she said it, but he let it go. He finished the broth, she finished the seam. Neither of them tracked the time, which meant it was well past 1 in the morning, when he became aware that the candle had burned down significantly, and that he should leave before the kitchen staff began arriving for the early shift. He stood, she stood. There was a brief moment in which they were both standing at a small kitchen table at 1 in the morning, and neither of them had a very good explanation for how they had ended up there. "Thank you," he said. "The kitchen is always open," she said, which was not technically true, but she said it anyway. He nodded and turned toward the door, and then stopped. "Marin puts wildflowers out for bonds that have not been named yet," he said, without turning around. "Old pack tradition." A silence. "I know," Sarah said. Her voice was very even. He nodded again and left. In the corridor, he stood for a moment in the dark, with one hand on the cold stone wall. His wolf was not pointing east anymore. It was still. Fully, completely, perfectly still. Not because the pull had ended, because he had answered it. He walked back to his chambers, and for the first time in 2 weeks, he slept without difficulty. The news reached Lady Clara Ashvale by Thursday morning. She had the kind of network that worked overnight, which she had built carefully and maintained without anyone realizing what it was. Not informants exactly, people who found her useful to talk to. It came to the same reality, but the framing was softer. What the network delivered was this. The Alpha King had been seen in the kitchen. Twice. Once in the corridor, once inside, late at night. He had sat at the kitchen table with the head cook. He had eaten her food. He had left after midnight. Clara sat with this information for approximately 4 minutes. Then she called her personal attendant and sent 3 letters. One to Lord Greaves's office, one to the estate's head of household administration, and one to a woman named Dorla, who managed the staff scheduling for the upper floors. The letters were polite. They were also very precise. The one to Lord Greaves noted her support for his position on the Spring Summit announcement and suggested that, in the interest of propriety, it might be wise to ensure that certain boundaries between estate staff and the Alpha King's personal time were maintained. She framed it as protocol. She did not name the head cook. The one to the Household Administration Office raised concerns about kitchen service efficiency and suggested that the current scheduling arrangement might be creating overlap in the Alpha's evening routine. She recommended a review. The one to Dorla said a little more. What followed was not dramatic. The most effective moves rarely were. By Friday, a formal schedule review had been initiated. By Saturday, there was a new staff arrangement on the board in the kitchen. Sarah was moved to the early preparation shift only. Pre-dawn start, 3 in the morning. Her responsibilities ended by midday. No evening service, no late-night duties. The notice on the board called it a recognition of her exceptional contributions and an opportunity to focus on the most demanding preparation period of the day. Sarah stood in front of the board for a moment without moving. Ada came and stood next to her. Ada read the notice. Ada did not say anything. Pip appeared, read the notice over their shoulders, and started to open his mouth. "If that bread is not turned in the next 2 minutes, it will be overdone," Sarah said, without looking at him. Pip turned the bread. Sarah took the notice off the board, folded it, put it in her apron pocket, and went back to work. She made no comment about it. She did not change her expression. She answered every question the kitchen staff asked her that day, with the same steady attention she always gave them, and she ran the morning service the same way she always ran it, and when her shift ended at midday she walked to the staff quarters and sat on the edge of her bed in the early afternoon light. She knew what it was. You did not grow up Omega and miss the shape of this kind of move. Someone had decided she was a problem and had arranged for her to become inconvenient. The reassignment was clean. There was nothing in it that could be argued against on its face. More hours in the preparation shift, clearer task delineation. Framed as a promotion. Framed as a promotion. She looked at the window. The thing was, she understood it. She was not naive about the world she lived in. An Omega cook, half rank in a royal estate, sitting with the Alpha King at midnight. She understood how that looked. She understood what people who had more to lose from it than she did would feel about it. She did not blame them for moving against it. She just wished the kitchen could have been left out of it. She also understood, clearly, without drama, that whatever had been beginning in that kitchen, in those late hours, was something she should not have been allowing herself to build toward in the first place. Not because it was not real. It was real in a way that frightened her, actually. But because real and possible were different things. She was practical. She had always been practical. It was the thing that had kept her upright through the rogue attack, through 4-pack estates, through 8 years of being a wolf without a home pack, through every morning she woke up and had to build the day from the beginning. You could not afford to want things that were not in reach. The energy it took was energy stolen from the things that were. She unfolded the notice and read it again, then folded it back up. 3 in the morning. Fine. She would start at 3. She would do the work excellently, the way she always did it. The kitchen would run well. It always ran well under her. And she would stop allowing herself to sit in candlelit kitchens at midnight with wolves who wore their power like a second skin and listened to her like she was saying something worth hearing. She got up, changed her clothes, and went back to the kitchen to start the inventory for the following week. In the estate above her, Kaylin Voss noticed on Friday evening that the kitchen smell in the east corridor had shifted. Not gone. The day's cooking still clung to the stone, but different. Earlier in the cycle. Less present by evening. He said nothing. He went back to the war room. On Saturday, he asked Owen in passing whether there had been any changes to the kitchen staff schedule. Owen looked at him carefully. A shift reassignment. The head cook moved to early prep only. Nothing unusual. When was this authorized? Household administration. Standard scheduling review. Kaylin picked up a document and did not look at it. Was there a reason given? Efficiency review. Owen's voice was measured. I can pull the full paperwork if you want it. Get it. Owen retrieved it. Kaylin read it. The language was clean, and the reasoning was technically sound, and absolutely nothing in it pointed at a specific person who might have requested the review, because people who made this kind of move were careful about not leaving fingerprints. But Lord Greaves had attached his name to the efficiency report, which was unusual for a kitchen staffing change, and Lady Clara Ashvale's household had submitted a formal letter of commendation for the estate's renewed commitment to proper service protocols the same week the review was initiated. He sat with this for a moment. Then he went back to work, because acting immediately on frustration produced worse outcomes than thinking first. And he was thinking. Sunday came, and then Monday. And Monday morning at 4, when the eastern sky was still completely dark and the rest of the estate was asleep, Sarah was in the kitchen, with her apron tied, and the stove lit, and her hands in dough that would rise and be ready for the morning service at 7. She worked in the dark the way she had learned to work in the dark, efficiently, without wasted motion, feeling the familiar shapes of things by hand rather than sight. The smell of the rising bread was very particular at this hour, when there were no other smells to compete with it. Just bread and the faint smoke of the stove and the cold stone under her feet. She was not sad. She was careful about that. She had known sorrow deep enough to pull you under, if you were not precise about where you stood in relation to it. This was not sorrow. This was adjustment. She was adjusting. The warmth in her chest was quieter this week, more distant. She tried not to think about what that meant. Upstairs, in the east-facing rooms of the upper floor, Kaylin lay in the dark. His wolf was awake, facing east, and it had the particular tension of something that is watching something it does not fully understand, and trusts less and less the longer it watches. He had made a mistake by not acting sooner. He saw that clearly now. He had been deliberate when deliberate was wrong. He had moved cautiously, and given other people time to move, and other people had moved, and now Sarah was working in the dark at 4 in the morning, while he lay in his chambers and thought about paperwork. His wolf made a sound that was not particularly patient. He did not disagree with it. He made a decision. The formal dinner had been arranged 3 weeks in advance. It was a political meal, the kind that came wrapped in pleasantries and ran on careful language, where everything discussed at the table had a subtext, and everyone present was aware of the subtext, and nobody mentioned it directly. 2 visiting alpha heads from neighboring territories, Lord Greaves acting as senior advisor, Lady Clara Ashvale and her father, seated across from Kaylin, the conversation moving through safe channels, trade routes, winter supply arrangements, the ongoing situation at the Northern Pass. Kaylin sat at the head of the table and managed it the way he managed everything, competently, without apparent effort, speaking when he needed to, and being quiet when quiet was more strategic. He asked the right questions. He let Lord Greaves say the things that needed saying, so that Kaylin did not have to take official positions on things that were still in motion. He watched the visiting alphas the way he always watched people he was assessing. Not obviously, not with the directness that would put them on guard, but with the peripheral attention of a wolf, who had been reading rooms since childhood. Lady Clara spoke twice, both times well-timed, both times with the practiced ease of a woman who had been in these rooms her whole life. She was intelligent. He had never doubted that about her. The intelligence made the move she had made against Sarah's schedule more frustrating, not less. A less intelligent person might have been easier to address directly. The second course arrived. The conversation moved to the spring summit. Lord Greaves, with the smooth inevitability of a man who had been building toward this moment through 3 courses, introduced the subject of Kaelin's attendance. The Ironmore Alpha King would be expected, naturally, and at an event of this significance, with representatives from every major pack territory in attendance, a display of dynastic stability would send a valuable message to the larger community. A display of dynastic stability, Kaelin repeated. A mate announcement, Lord Greaves said, abandoning the soft version, since the soft version had not landed. Or at minimum, a confirmed courtship. Lord Ashvale looked at his plate with studied neutrality. Clara looked at Kaelin with the expression of a person who had rehearsed several versions of this moment, and was waiting to see which version she would need to use. Kaelin looked at Lord Greaves. And then something happened in the left side of his chest. It was not pain. It was not the gradual pull of the past 2 weeks. It was different. A sudden, sharp awareness, like a sound that cuts through noise. His wolf surged without warning, not with aggression, but with the animal urgency of something precious moving out of range, something being lost, something that needed his attention right now. He recognized the feeling. He had felt it exactly once before, when he was 14, and his father's condition had worsened in the night, without warning, and his wolf had woken him before the household had. He pushed back his chair and stood up. The table went very quiet. "We will continue this tomorrow," he said. His voice was steady. He was good at steady. "Please enjoy the rest of the meal." He did not wait for a response. He walked out of the dining room without looking at anyone, because looking at anyone right now would have required an explanation he did not have, except the truth, which was that something in the East Wing needed him. He took the stairs fast. He moved through the lower hall without pausing, past the laundry, past the storage corridor, and he pushed the kitchen door open. She was there. It was a few hours before the early shift, and the kitchen was lit by the glow of the banked stove and 2 candles set on the prep table. Sarah was standing with her back to the door, already at the prep table, working. Her back was very straight. Her apron was tied with the particular neatness of someone who had tied aprons every day of their adult life. Her headscarf was slightly crooked. She was pressing dough. The rhythmic movement of it, push, fold, turn, was the only sound in the kitchen. She sensed him before she heard him. He could see it in the slight pause in her shoulders, in the way her hands stilled for just a fraction of a second before continuing. She finished the fold she was doing, and then she turned. She looked at him. He looked at her. The kitchen was very still. The candles did not move. The stove breathed low. "You have heard about the dinner," she said. Not a question. "I left the dinner," he said. A pause. Her hands were at her sides now, dusted with flour, completely still. "You should not have done that," she said. "Lord Greaves will." "Someone moved your schedule," he said. She looked at him directly, which she always did. "It was a scheduling review," she said. "It was a move," he said, "by someone who wanted to reduce your presence in the upper floor evening routine. A beat. Clara Ashvale." Her face did not change. "You cannot know that for certain." "I can know it for certain," he said. "I read the paperwork." Another pause, slightly longer. "It is appropriate," she said. Her voice was very even. "You are the Alpha King. The spring summit is coming. You need to be considering." "Look at me," he said. She was already looking at him. This was a request to look at him differently, and she seemed to understand that, because her expression shifted, just slightly, the professional surface thinning, and whatever was underneath was something he recognized. Something he had seen in that first midnight kitchen, when she was mending the seam and talking about her mother. He crossed the kitchen. He stopped about a foot from her, close enough to be deliberate but without touching. He could see the faint smudge of flour on her cheek, the slight tension in her jaw, the way her wolf was showing in her eyes, even while the rest of her stayed controlled. "My wolf has been walking me down this corridor every morning for over 2 weeks," he said. Since before I knew your name. Since before I could even see the door clearly from where I was standing. She breathed. Her chest rose and fell. The morning we collided in the corridor, he said. I was on my way here. I had talked myself out of it 4 times, and then my feet stopped listening. He paused. When I took your hand to help you up, my wolf went quiet. The kind of quiet that only has one name. Her eyes were very bright. Her voice, when she spoke, was careful. You are describing a fated bond, she said. Yes. You cannot know it is that. I can know it is that, he said, because I have lived with this wolf for 28 years, and it has never behaved this way about anyone in the world, and what I feel when I am in this room is something that does not have another explanation. She shook her head. Once. I am an Omega, a cook. I have no rank. I have no standing. In pack hierarchy, I have no claim to. You have mine, he said, if you want it. The sentence landed in the kitchen and stayed there. Sarah looked at him. Her hands were still. The dough sat forgotten on the prep table. The candles burned on either side of the long kitchen table. She was frightened. He could see it clearly. Not of him, but of this. Of the size of this thing being named. He understood that. He was not entirely unfrightened himself, and he was someone who had spent 28 years being difficult to frighten. Kalen, she said. His name, not his title. First time she had said it. It sounded like something settling. He waited. She reached up. Both hands, flour-dusted, warm, strong hands, and she put them flat against the sides of his face, with the particular deliberateness of someone making an irreversible decision, and whatever the bond was doing between them, the part that had been pulling and warming and pointing east this entire time, it stopped pulling. Because you stop pulling towards something when you have arrived. He felt it complete the way you feel a door finally closing in a house. Not dramatic, just done. Right. The shape the world was always going to take, once you stopped walking away from it. His wolf, inside his chest, went completely and entirely quiet. The kind of quiet it had never been before. Not the silence of exhaustion or distance. The silence of something that has found exactly what it was looking for, and does not need to look anymore. He brought his hands up and covered hers. All right, he said, very quietly, like it was the simplest thing. All right, she said, like it was. And outside the kitchen window, in the dark of the early morning, the old gold wildflowers along the east wall moved in a wind that was not blowing anywhere else in the garden. The bond was real. It was also quiet, and it asked to be kept quietly for a while, and both of them seemed to understand this without discussing it. Not hidden. Not the same as hidden, but private. There was a difference between the two that mattered to Sarah, and she thought it mattered to Kalen as well, because he was a man who understood the weight of public announcements and what followed them. A declaration made at the wrong moment, without the ground prepared beneath it, would be fought with everything people who disagreed had available to fight with. They had time. Not unlimited time, but some. What the time looked like was this. Kalen appeared in the kitchen 3 times that first week. Not at midnight, not in the dramatic way of the first night, just in the evenings, before the kitchen closed, when the main work was done, and the staff had gone. He came in the way a person comes back to a place they have decided to belong to, without requiring a ceremony for it. He sat at the long prep table. He talked. This was the thing that surprised Sarah most, in a week of many surprising things. She had expected formality, or at least some version of it, the careful, measured speech of a man who had spent 28 years on one side of a significant power divide. She had not expected him to sit down at a kitchen table and simply talk. He talked about the Northern Pass situation, not asking her opinion on it, just thinking out loud. She listened. He said the patrol increase was not a permanent solution. The real issue was the lack of a shelter outpost at the midpoint of the pass that rogue packs were using. He was working on funding the construction. She said that the packs near the Greyfen territory, where she was from, had faced the same problem in her childhood. They had used an old hunting cabin as a temporary outpost for years, before the main pack built a proper structure. He looked at her. What did the cabin look like? She described it. He asked 3 specific questions about the layout. She answered them. By the end of the evening, he had sketched the rough shape of a new design on the margin of a document he had brought with him, using the description she had given. and he set the document aside to take back to the garrison captain. It was the strangest conversation Sarah had ever had. Also, somehow, the most natural. The second evening, he brought a book. He set it on the table and slid it across without making it an occasion, the same way he did most things, without ceremony, just direct. She picked it up. Old leather cover, worn at the corners. The spine read, A History of the Northern Territory Pacts, Volume 2. She opened it. Her hands went very still. The Northern Pacts. The chapter map showed the Greyfen territory on page 47, with full history, formation, leadership lineage, pack culture, the particular traditions that distinguished the northern wolves from the central and southern territories. She turned to page 47 and began reading without meaning to, standing at the table with the book open in her hands, and the words were like hearing a language she had grown up speaking and had not heard spoken in a long time. She looked up after a minute. Kaelin was watching her with an expression she was still learning to read, something between careful and warm, in the particular way his face showed warmth, which was never loud, but was absolutely there when you knew where to look. "Where did you find this?" she said. "Estate library. West wing, 3rd floor. Old collection." He paused. "I had the library attendant search the northern pack volumes. There were 4. That one covers the Greyfen area most completely." She held the book with both hands. She did not trust herself to say much for a moment. "Thank you," she said. That was all she said. He nodded, the way he nodded when something was settled, and went back to what he had been reviewing. She sat down and read for 20 minutes while he worked at the same table. The kitchen was warm and quiet around them. Pip had left a small pot of tea before he had gone, apparently having silently decided that the Alpha King deserved tea when he was in the kitchen, and that nobody needed to discuss this out loud. Ada had noticed. Marin had certainly noticed. The kitchen staff knew something was different. Kaelin's presence was hardly something that could be made invisible, but no one said anything directly, not because they were indifferent. Because Sarah had been steady and clear with them from the beginning, and they trusted her to handle things at her own pace, and because they were, she could see it in the small ways, quietly, entirely pleased. Ada had started leaving 2 cups on the table in the evenings. Pip had started staying 15 minutes later than his shift, to make sure there was something worth eating available when Kaelin arrived. Marin had put a second bundle of wildflowers on the kitchen windowsill. Kaelin, for his part, moved through the changes with the ease of a man who had made a decision, and was not interested in second-guessing it. He was different in the kitchen than he was anywhere else in the estate. Not entirely different, not performing something he was not, but quieter, less managed. He said things in the kitchen that she suspected he did not say elsewhere, and she treated that with the seriousness it deserved. One evening he told her about the year his father had been dying, not the king's version of it, the version that had gone into the official pack record, but the real one, how the war room had felt different without his father's voice in it, how he had made his first major strategic decision, the border negotiation at Westfall, with his father unconscious 3 floors above him, and no one to ask whether he was doing it right. Sarah listened. "Were you right?" she asked. "The negotiation worked," he said. "That is not the same as whether you were right." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I do not know. I did the thing that made sense, given what I knew. Whether it was right, whether there was a better version of it that a more experienced person would have found, I cannot know that. My mother used to say that you make the best dish you know how to make with the ingredients in front of you," Sarah said. "You cannot make something with ingredients you do not have yet." He looked at her steadily. "She sounds like she was very wise." "She was," Sarah said, simply, and did not feel the need to say anything else. He brought her a second book the following week. This one was smaller, a collection of old pack recipes from the Northern Territories, gathered by a scholar who had traveled the region 3 generations ago. The annotations in the margins were in a handwriting that might have been 200 years old. She read it and started incorporating small things into the kitchen. A spice combination from an old Greyfen harvest recipe. A bread-shaping technique that the book described as traditional for winter festivals. Ada tasted the bread and said, "That is different." "Old Northern technique," Sarah said. "It is better," Ada said. "I know," Sarah said. She found herself less afraid of things that she had been afraid of, for most of her adult life. Not the large fears. Those would take longer. But the smaller ones. The daily habit of making herself less than she was, of taking up less space than she needed, of calibrating her voice to the room, rather than to the truth. Kaylin never asked her to do any of those things. He asked her questions, and waited for the full answer. He did not look surprised when she disagreed with him. She had disagreed with him twice in the second week, once about the patrol shelter design, and once about the grain allocation system Owen had proposed, and both times he had looked at her with his head slightly tilted, the way he looked when something was worth thinking about, and said nothing dismissive. On the grain allocation, he had actually changed his position. She had not expected that. Lady Clara Ashvale had stopped coming to dinner at the estate 3 days after the night Kaylin left the formal meal. The official reason was that she had personal matters to attend to in her home territory. Sarah was glad of it, not because she wished Clara ill, but because the kitchen had been quieter since she left. The political question was not solved. She was not naive enough to think it was. Lord Greaves had sent 2 more letters to Kaylin's study, and the spring summit was approaching. The pack hierarchy was not going to simply accept an Omega as Alpha Queen-elect without a fight. She knew this. What she also knew was that Kaylin knew it, and that he was not the kind of man who stepped back from fights he had decided to fight. She had decided something during the 3rd week of evening conversations. She was going to trust him. Not blindly, she had never been blind in her life, but with the specific, clear-eyed trust of someone who had watched him carefully, and found that what she saw was real. He did not make promises he did not mean. He did not say soft things to make difficult moments easier. He was direct and honest, and he listened, which was rarer than anyone gave it credit for. She was going to trust him to handle what needed handling, and she was going to do what she did best, which was run this kitchen with everything she had, and make food that told the truth. Marin appeared on a Thursday morning and looked at the 2 cups on the kitchen table and the stack of books in the corner, and her expression was the happiest Sarah had ever seen, on a face that was generally very controlled. "He smiles in here," Marin said. Not to Sarah specifically, more to the room in general. "He is a serious man," Sarah said. "He is a serious man who smiles in here," Marin said. "In 28 years I have not seen that." Sarah pressed her lips together and turned back to the stove. But she was smiling. The petition arrived on a Tuesday. It was a formal document, the kind that came in a sealed leather folder, presented by hand to the senior advisor, logged in the official records before it was opened. Kaylin read it on Tuesday evening in the war room, with the lamp turned up, and Owen standing near the door in the particular stance he used when he expected the next 10 minutes to be complicated. 3 high alpha families, coordinating jointly, which was unusual. It required a significant shared investment to get 3 alpha houses to put their names on the same formal request. The document petitioned Kaylin, as Alpha King of Ironmore, to formally initiate a mate selection process from among approved high-ranking candidates before the spring summit. It cited pack law, succession stability, the welfare of the broader pack community, and the precedent set by the last 3 Alpha Kings of Ironmore. It was co-signed by Lord Greaves. The name under Lord Greaves on the page was Lord Frederick Ashvale, Clara's father. Kaylin read the document twice. He set it down. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at the wall for a moment with the expression of a man doing a very specific kind of thinking. "It is within pack law," Owen said from the door. "I know. The co-signatories include 2 of the most influential alpha houses outside our direct territory. I know. There is a precedent argument that is genuinely difficult to..." "Owen. Yes. I know. That is not the problem." Owen was quiet. "The problem," Kaylin said, "is that this document assumes the decision is still open, and it is not." Owen looked at him for a long moment. Then, in the careful voice of someone who was very good at his job, "You are certain?" "I am certain." "Then you are going to need a strategy for the summit that does not hand them the legal ground to challenge you," Owen said. He moved to the desk and sat down across from it, which was the posture he used when they were working on something real. "The fated bond claim is strong. Under pack law, a confirmed fated bond supersedes any arranged or petitioned mating." "Correct. But confirmed has a definition. It requires acknowledgement by both parties, witnessed by at least 1 pack elder or registered pack official." "Marin," Kaylin said. "She is a registered pack official," Owen said. Her status is unquestionable. He was quiet for a moment. Has she witnessed? Not formally. Then we need a formal moment, Owen said. One that is recorded and cannot be disputed. The summit itself, Kaelin said. Owen looked at him steadily. You want to make the announcement at the summit. In front of every high alpha house that is attending. In front of the co-signatories of this petition. He picked up the leather folder and set it aside. They want a witnessed public commitment. I will give them one. Just not the one they are asking for. Owen was quiet for 3 seconds, which for Owen was a long time. Then he said, that is either a very strong move or an extraordinarily risky one. It is both, Kaelin said. Get me the summit attendance list. The next morning, Sarah found the warmth in her chest sharper than usual, and it was not a comfortable sharpness. It had the quality of something that knew what was coming before she did. She heard about the petition by midday. Not from Kaelin, from Pip, who had overheard 2 household guards discussing it near the laundry. Pip told her in the careful, uncertain way of someone who did not know whether the information would hurt the person they were telling, and she could see the worry in his young face. She thanked him and sent him to check the afternoon bread. She stood at the stove for a moment with the spoon in her hand. She was not surprised. She had been expecting something like this since the evening she had watched Kaelin walk out of the formal dinner. The political machinery of the pack world did not slow down for fated bonds. It moved against them when they became inconvenient, with as much force and legal precision as could be organized. The surprise was how much it hurt, even though she had been expecting it. Not fear exactly. Something more specific. The particular loneliness of being the person that everyone else was trying to keep out of the room. She cooked the afternoon service. She did everything she was supposed to do, with her full attention and her full skill, and if the broth was perhaps a little quieter in its flavor that afternoon, a little more subdued, she was the only one who would know why. Kaelin appeared that evening. She heard him in the corridor before he came in. He came through the door and looked at her immediately. He was good at reading rooms. She suspected he had always been good at reading rooms. You have heard, he said. This morning, she said. She kept her voice even. It is appropriate, actually. I have been thinking about it and… Sarah. She stopped. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and stood in front of her, close, but not touching, in the way he had learned was right for her, present without crowding. Tell me what you are thinking, he said. Not the appropriate version, the real one. She looked at him for a moment. Then she set the wooden spoon down. I am thinking, she said, carefully, that I am an Omega cook, without rank or family name, or any standing in the hierarchy that you operate in. And I am thinking that the reason 3 high alpha houses can write a formal petition to the Alpha King is because they live in a world where an Omega from a dead pack is not a real option, and they are not being cruel. They are just being accurate. She met his eyes. I do not want to cost you more than you should have to pay. He looked at her for a long moment. Do you know what 3 high alpha families coordinating on a formal petition requires? He said. A shared concern, she said. Fear, he said. They are afraid of something. You do not spend political weight like this on something you are confident about. He paused. They would not be this afraid of a situation they believed they could control. She watched him. My father used to say that the measure of what a thing is worth is how hard other people work to take it from you, he said. The kitchen was very quiet. She said, I am still an Omega. I know what you are, he said. And there was nothing dismissive in it. It was the voice of a man who had learned exactly what she was over weeks of kitchen evenings and late-night conversations, and who had arrived at a clear conclusion. You are someone who has been building things out of very little for 8 years. You are someone who knows how to make people feel welcome without saying a word. You are someone who reads a room better than most trained diplomats I have dealt with, and you have never had a single lesson in diplomacy. He paused. You are also the only person I have sat with in this kitchen at midnight and talked to like a person instead of a function. She breathed. There is no appropriate version of this situation that does not include you, he said. The petition does not change that. Lord Greaves does not change that. The spring summit does not change that. She looked at him. The bond was very warm between them, warmer than it had been in days, which was the bond being honest about what it knew. What do you intend to do? She said. Attend the summit, he said, with you beside me, and make it clear, in front of every alpha house in attendance, that the bond is confirmed, and the decision is made. A silence. They will push back, she said. They will. It will be difficult. It will. And you are still certain. He looked at her with those gold eyes in the candlelit kitchen, and he said, very simply, completely. Sarah looked at the kitchen around her, the stove, the prep table, the books in the corner, the 2 cups that Ada always left on the table in the evenings, the wildflowers on the windowsill that were still blooming, even though no one had planted them. She thought about her mother, standing over a pot and talking to a small girl on a wooden stool. This is how you make someone feel welcome, without saying a word. She thought about 8 years of moving through the world, with nothing but her skill, and her stubbornness, and the particular Northern Pack pride that no rogue attack had managed to take from her. She said, I need to tell you something. He waited. I am not going to be afraid in that room, she said. Whatever happens, I need you to know that in advance, so that when they see me stand up straight in there, and not look sorry for myself, you understand it is not stubbornness. It is just who I am. Something in his face shifted, and what she saw was what she had seen only rarely, in unguarded moments in the kitchen late at night. Warmth, direct and unfiltered, not managed or performed. I know, he said. And Marin, passing the kitchen window on her evening rounds, looked in through the glass, and saw 2 people standing in the warmth of the kitchen light with the wildflowers on the sill between them, and she went to bed smiling. The spring summit was held in the estate's main hall, a room built to hold every significant wolf in the territory, which it was doing now. The hall was full when Kaelin arrived, which was deliberate on the summit committee's part. A full hall put the Alpha King in public view from the moment he walked in. Every face and every reaction would be witnessed by everyone else. Kaelin walked in with Sarah at his side. Not behind him, which was the protocol position for an escort. Beside him, which was not. The noise of the hall did not stop immediately. It took approximately 4 seconds, the time it took for the people nearest the entrance to see, and for the sight to ripple backward through the room. Then there was a significant change in the sound, the kind you heard at pack events when something unexpected happened. Not a silence. A shift, settling into a very attentive quiet. Kaelin let the room process it. He was good at letting rooms process things. You stood still, and you let the information move, and then you spoke into a room that was ready to hear you, which was always more effective than speaking into one that was still catching up. Sarah stood beside him. She was wearing her best dress, which was not a dress made for a summit hall, and which she knew it. It was clean and well made, and it fit almost right. The shoulders slightly too broad, the hem a half-inch too short, the dark color practical rather than decorative. She had her hair pinned up in the way she wore it for formal kitchen occasions. Her hands were folded in front of her, very still. She was not afraid. She had told him she would not be afraid, and she was not. She was something more interesting than afraid. She was alert, the way people are alert when they are in a place they know is dangerous, and they have decided to be in it anyway. Her eyes moved through the room with the measuring look he had come to recognize, the look she used when she was reading a situation and calculating what it needed. He stepped forward. "Thank you for attending the spring summit," he said. His voice carried without effort. There were things that 28 years of Alpha authority did to a voice that training alone could not replicate. "I have a matter to bring before the full assembly, before we proceed to the agenda." Lord Greaves, seated at the council table, had gone very still. Lord Ashvale, beside him, was wearing the expression of a man who had already guessed the shape of what was coming, and was deciding how to respond to it. "It has come to my attention," Kaelin said, "that a formal petition was submitted to my office, requesting that I initiate a mate selection process from among approved high-ranking candidates before this summit." He paused. "I want to address that petition directly." The hall was entirely quiet now. Under pack law, a confirmed fated bond takes precedence over any formal petition or arranged mating process, he said. "This is not a point of interpretation. It is the oldest provision in the law, older than the petition process itself, and it exists because the pack tradition has always understood that a wolf's bond is not a political instrument." He looked at Lord Greaves. Lord Greaves did not look away. "I am presenting to this assembly my confirmed fated mate." He said it without announcement or drama. "The way you state a fact. Sarah Dune, formerly of the Greyfen Pack in the Northern Territory, currently the head cook of Ironmore Estate, My wolf found her first. The bond has been acknowledged by both parties and witnessed. Marin, standing near the side wall in her formal housekeeper's position, very slightly nodded. The hall did not take it well. He had expected this. Lord Greaves rose from the council table. He was a careful man, and he chose his objection carefully. The Assembly has enormous respect for the tradition of the fated bond, he said, in the measured tone of someone making a legal argument. However, PAC precedent requires that a formal bond claim be supported by significant evidence before it is entered into the official record. An acknowledgement from the two parties is not, by itself, sufficient for. The estate housekeeper witnessed the acknowledgement, Kaelin said. Her position as a registered PAC official is a matter of record. Her documentation is available for review. He looked at Lord Greaves directly. If there is a challenge to her status, I would welcome the opportunity to address it formally. There was not a challenge to Marin's status, because Marin had been a registered PAC official for 30 years, and challenging her would have been farcical. Lord Greaves sat back down. Lord Ashvale rose next. He was Clara's father, which meant his objection carried a personal weight that made it louder than a purely political one. The Greyfen PAC, he said, with the careful emphasis of someone suggesting that the name should communicate something, was destroyed 8 years ago in a rogue attack. The survivor records are incomplete. The claim to Northern PAC heritage cannot be. The Northern PAC heritage claim is supported by the estate records of 4 separate PAC houses where she served, Kaelin said. It is also supported by the regional PAC registry from the Greyfen territory, which survived the attack, and which I have obtained a copy of from the Northern Archives. He looked at Ashvale. Her family is listed in that registry. Her lineage is recorded. The Northern PACs are not unimportant because they were small, Lord Ashvale. Ashvale sat down. 2 more voices from the floor, both challenging the standing of an Omega designation in a formal mate claim, both citing the conventional hierarchy, both making arguments that were legally viable, which was the part that required the most care. Kaelin answered each one. He had prepared. He had spent the week since the petition arrived in the war room with Owen, working through every possible challenge, mapping the legal ground, finding every applicable precedent and having it ready. He did not raise his voice. He did not move from where he stood. He answered each challenge with the precision of someone who had spent 5 years governing a major PAC territory and knew exactly where the law said what he needed it to say. Beside him, Sarah stood still. She was watching. She was reading the room. He could see it, the same measuring look, moving from face to face, tracking the audience the way she tracked a kitchen service in progress. When the 4th challenge was raised, an argument about Omega standing in official PAC records, she spoke. I can speak to my own standing, she said. The room looked at her. She had not raised her voice. She did not need to. The hall was quiet enough that her ordinary speaking voice reached it. She was looking at the speaker who had raised the Omega challenge, and her expression was attentive and composed. My standing as Omega is correct, and I do not dispute it, she said. The hierarchy of this territory has always assigned that designation to wolves of my particular bloodline, and I have no argument with the tradition itself. She paused. What I would point out is that the PAC law provision on fated bonds makes no mention of hierarchical rank as a disqualifying condition. It does not say confirmed fated bond of an appropriate rank. It says confirmed fated bond. If there is a version of this law that includes a rank requirement, I would welcome the opportunity to read it. Silence. The speaker who had raised the challenge did not produce a version of the law that included a rank requirement, because that version did not exist. A murmur moved through the room. Not all of it hostile. Some of it, a surprising amount of it, something else. Something that sounded like, if not approval, at least genuine interest. An older female alpha from the Western Territory, Alpha Nora Halleth, who had a reputation for saying exactly what she thought without consulting anyone, said from her seat, in a carrying voice, "She reads the law better than half the men on this floor." I would call that a point in her favor. Several other voices seconded this in various ways. Lord Greaves looked at the ceiling for a moment. Kaelin let the room settle. If there are no further legal challenges, he said, I would like to proceed to the formal record. He looked at the assembly secretary at the side table, who had been writing steadily for the last 15 minutes. Please record the confirmation of the fated bond, and the formal presentation of the Ironmore Alpha's confirmed mate. to be entered into the official pack record. The secretary looked at Lord Greaves. Lord Greaves looked at the table. He said nothing that constituted an objection. The secretary wrote. Beside him, Kalen felt Sarah exhale. Very controlled, very quiet. He felt it because they were standing close enough, and because the bond was specific about things like that now. He put his hand against the small of her back. She stood up straighter. Not because she needed the support, because the touch said, present, real, decided. The same things he had been saying since the kitchen at midnight, the same things the bond had been saying since before either of them had language for it. The summit continued. There were other matters, trade discussions, the Northern Pass situation, the spring planting agreements between the Eastern Pac territories. Kalen handled them with his usual competence. Sarah sat at the council table in her slightly too broad dress and listened, and when she was asked a direct question by Alpha Haleth about the Northern Pass geography, because Haleth had done her research and knew where Sarah was from, she answered it with the same directness she applied to everything. The meeting took 4 hours. When it was done and the hall was clearing, the kitchen of Ironmore Estate was the first place Sarah thought of. She said as much to Kalen as they walked out of the hall, and he said, without hesitation, "Then we will go there." The kitchen was quiet when they arrived. Pip had left the stove banked and the bread wrapped. Ada had left tea. Marin, who had beaten them both to it somehow, had put fresh wildflowers in the window. Sarah stood in the middle of her kitchen and looked at all of it, and felt something very large and quiet settle into place. She changed into her work clogs. She washed her hands. She checked the bread. Kalen sat at the prep table and watched her move through the kitchen. The particular way she moved in this room, sure and easy, knowing where everything was, fitting into the space like the space had been made for her. "Are you going to cook something?" he said. "Broth," she said. "It is late, and I want broth. It is 9 o'clock in the evening. Broth does not care what time it is." She started it. Root vegetables first, then the herbs from the bundle above the window. Rosemary, thyme, the pale northern sage. She worked the way she always worked, quietly and with full attention, and the kitchen filled with the smell of it. He said, after a while, "You spoke well today." "I said what was true," she said. "That is the same thing," he said, "when the truth is what is needed." She stirred the broth and thought about her mother, standing over a pot in a northern kitchen with the wild garlic coming in through the back door, and a small girl on a stool asking why the sage smelled the way it did. "Because it is honest," her mother had said. "All the best things are honest. You can taste the difference." The broth came together. She ladled it into 2 bowls and set one in front of Kalen and sat down across from him. He picked up his spoon. She picked up hers. The kitchen was warm, and the candles were burning, and somewhere above the estate, the spring sky was moving through its stars, indifferent and eternal, the way skies were. In the weeks that followed, the estate changed in small ways that accumulated into something significant. The staff talked more easily when Kalen passed through the lower floors. The kitchen door was given a proper lock at Sarah's request, installed without fuss. The northern sage in the herb garden was replanted in a wider bed. The second chair at the prep table became permanent. Owen began scheduling the morning brief 10 minutes later to allow for the fact that Kalen occasionally read in the kitchen before coming upstairs, which was not a formal change to the schedule, and which Owen did not annotate in the official records, but which everyone in the estate understood, without needing it explained. The High Alpha families who had co-signed the petition dealt with the outcome in their various ways. Lord Greaves sent a formal letter acknowledging the bond and the assembly record, which was the professional thing to do, and which Kalen acknowledged with equal professionalism. Lord Ashvale sent nothing, which was his prerogative. Alpha Haleth sent a letter addressed to Sarah directly, which was unusual, and which made Ada exclaim about it for 20 minutes when it arrived. The letter said, "Well handled. The sage detail was a good touch. Come to the Western Summit in autumn." Sarah wrote back a brief, honest reply. She did not stop cooking. This was not a thing anyone had asked her to stop doing, or that she had any intention of stopping. It would have been like asking the estate to stop having walls. The kitchen ran the way it always ran, early, demanding, precise, and full of the particular kind of care that nobody who worked in a good kitchen ever fully stopped pouring into the work. What changed was this: the kitchen knew things first. The kitchen had always known things first. The staff who gathered there in the early mornings, the warmth that came through the stone before the upper floors had woken, the smell that moved through the east corridor every day and reached places in the estate that the inhabitants might not have expected it to reach. It all still worked the way it had always worked. Only now, when Kalen walked down the east corridor in the early morning, he did not turn back. He pushed open the door and went in. And the kitchen was warm, and the bread was rising, and Sarah was there, with her hands in the work that was her language, and everything that needed to be said was already being said by the smell of the sage and the heat of the stove and the 2 cups on the prep table that were never 1 cup, not anymore. The wolf in Kalen Voss's chest was quiet. It had been quiet since the January kitchen at 1 in the morning, since the flour-dusted hands on his face, since the word "all right" said in a voice that knew what it meant. His wolf did not pull east anymore, because east was already home.